Welcome and welcome back to Chilla Fashion. Today's video is going to be a tutorial on this fringe dress. So I'm going to be walking you through how much fringe fabric you'd be needing, how to draft the pattern and cut out the base gown, and also how to fit the fringe onto the base gown. So stick around and let's get right into this tutorial. So I have crepe fabric for the base gown and I have 2 yards of it for a size 16, and I also have my fringe. And the fringe I'm working with is a 6-inch fringe. And honestly, you're going to need a lot of fringe for this style, so just prepare for that. So to calculate how much fringe, I prepared this picture to explain. So please note that the formula I'm about to explain to you works for the 6-inch fringe that I'm working on in this video, but I'm going to explain the formula to you so you can manipulate it to fit whatever length of fringe you're working with. So we're starting off with how many layers we're going to need throughout the gown, and you're going to take the length of the gown, that is aside the strap or the sleeves, and you're going to take the length and divide it by 5. And we're dividing by 5 because we're using a 6-inch fringe. So the extra 1 inch is going to make it overlap over each other. So if you were using, for example, a 10-inch fringe, you would divide it by 9. So the length I was working with is 55 inches. So I divided by 5, that's 11. So I had 11 layers of fringe to place on the gown. So to get how many yards those 11 layers will be, I'm going to take the widest part of the client, which is the hip, and multiply it by 11, and whatever I get, I'm going to then divide by 36, and that's going to give the number of yards of fringe I'll need. Guys, so let me just explain using the case of my client that I'm sewing for. So the length of her dress is 55 inches and the length of the fringe is 6 inches, but since I want the fringe to overlap over each other, I'm going to use 5 inches. That's 6 inches minus 1. So I'm going to take the length of the dress and divide it by 5 inches, and that is 11. So this is the number of layers on the dress. So we're going to have 11 layers of fringe to completely cover the dress. So to get how many yards these 11 layers will be, I'm going to take the 11 and multiply it by the widest part of the client, which is the hip, and that's 44 inches. So 11 times 44 is 484, and there's 36 inches in 1 yard, so we're going to divide this 484 by 36, and this is going to give me about 13.5 yards. So I'm going to be using 13.5 yards of fringe. So if I want to double the lines of fringe on each layer, instead of using 1 line here, I use 2 lines, or 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines. If I want to triple it, all you have to do is just multiply this by 2 if you want to double each layer, or multiply by 3 if you want to triple each layer. That's if you want it to be fuller, but I'm using just a single line of fringe on each layer. So that's going to be this 13.5 yards that I got. So now let's go ahead to draft the pattern of the base gown. I'm cutting my pattern paper and I'm going to start with measuring out the reference lines. That's the shoulder to bust line, the shoulder to under bust line, and the shoulder to waist line. And I'm also adding 1 inch seam allowance to this. So I'm just going to be adding all the seam allowances as I draft the pattern, as opposed to adding them later on. Next, I'm going to take the shoulder measurement and divide it by 2. Whatever I get, I'm going to add half an inch seam allowance to it. So I'll just mark that down and then bring it down by 1 inch to form the shoulder slope. And I'm going to connect that to the neck, and I picked 3 inches for the neck width, even though we're going to be cutting off this part later on, but I just selected 3 inches just so I could connect the shoulder to it. Next, I'm going to mark down the armhole depth from the shoulder, which is usually 7 to 8.5 inches for adults. Or to be on the safe side, if you don't have the measurement for that, you could just mark out the shoulder divided by 2 as the armhole depth. So at whatever point the armhole depth stops, that's going to be the chest line. So now I'm going to go ahead to give the flat form some shape by adding that, and I'm going to mark the dart 4 inches away from the center front and 2.5 inches below the bust line, and the dart is going to be 1 inch wide, so that's ½ inch to each side of the dart. At this point, I'll take the round measurement, that's the bust first, divided by 4. Whatever I get, I'll mark it out and also add 1.5 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to go ahead to the under bust line, mark the under bust, divided by 4, and I'm going to add my 1.5 inch seam allowance also. Then at the waistline, I'm going to take the waist measurement divided by 4, add back the 1 inch we took for the dart before adding the 1.5 inch seam allowance. Now I can go ahead to form the neckline. I'm taking the center front neck depth to be 7 inches. Then I'm going to go ahead to mark the chest span divided by 2, or the chest width divided by 2, and that's 5 inches in this case. So because it's kind of a sweetheart neckline, at the point of the chest span, I'm going to make the neckline 5 inches deep. So we have 7 inches deep at the center front and 5 inches deep at the point of the chest span. Then I'm going to connect that to the armhole. So that the area around the armhole is not flappy and loose, I'm going to place a dart there, but I'm just going to mark it out for now, and later on we're going to draft out the dart, and I'm going to place the dart at the middle of the armhole. So here I'm just drawing out the strap so you could see how they will attach to the rest of the dress. Now I'll go ahead with the back piece, and first I'm marking out the zip allowance, which should be 1 inch, but I don't have enough pattern paper for that, so I just marked out the space that I had left. So the front piece is going to be the same as the back piece, so I'll just trace out the same measurements. The only difference is going to be the zip allowance, which the back has, and the armhole dart, which only the front has. So now I'm just going to go ahead to mark out the dart on the armhole of the front piece. The dart is going to be 1 inch above the bust line. It's going to be a slant line, and it's going to be 1 inch wide. That's ½ inch to the left and to the right. So by the time we've marked out this dart, if you are taking it in, you're going to notice that it's going to shorten the sides of the dress, or the sides of the front piece. So I'm just going to go ahead to add that back into the measurement, and I'll be doing that by attaching pattern paper to the side, because I don't have any pattern paper to draw on at the edge there. Now I'm just transferring the dart onto the back piece to just mark it out. So these are the front and the back pieces, also the strap or the sleeve piece. I'll go ahead to cut this on fabric, then I'll go ahead to cut out or draft the pattern of the lower half of the gown. So I'm using the front upper piece as reference to cut the lower pieces, and first I've folded the material in two to cut the lower piece, and I'm just marking where the measurements are going to start from. Then I'm measuring out the dart to match with the upper half. Is as wide as the upper half, which is 1 inch, and it is 4 inches long. Then after that, I'll go ahead to measure the shoulder to the hip, the shoulder to the knee, and the full length, and I'm adding 1.5 inch seam allowance to the full length. Now I'll go ahead with the round measurement, starting with the hip divided by 4, and then I'll add my 1.5 inch seam allowance to it, and then I'll just connect from the waist of the upper half down to the hip, and then to the knee and to the full length. So I've placed my fabric on fold to cut out the lower back piece, and I'm using the lower front piece to cut that out. The only difference is going to be the zip allowance, which will be 1 inch, which I'm going to be adding to the back piece. I went ahead to cut out the facing for the front piece, and I also went ahead to transfer the 4 darts onto the front piece. And because the facing covers only half of the front piece, the darts on the facing is just going to be the 2 top darts at the armholes. I also went ahead to mark out the 2 darts on the back piece. So I'll just go ahead to sew in all of these darts. So after sewing in the darts for the top half, I'll just go ahead to sew in the darts for the bottom half, the front and the back pieces. I'm also going to go ahead to make the dress straps, and on fold it is 1 inch. If I open that up, that's 2 inches, and I'm just going to sew it to be about half an inch and then turn it inside out with a safety pin. So I'll go ahead to cut out the length of the strap with the pattern paper, added a bit of seam allowance so the straps doesn't get short after sewing. Now I can go in to turn in the neckline and the armhole of the front piece using the facing, and I'm going to attach the sleeve during this process. And I'm attaching the sleeve this way only for the front piece. I'm going to attach the sleeve to the back piece or the back side of the dress later on when we're almost done with the dress. So I'm going to place the facing and the main fabric piece front sides facing each other and put the sleeves in between them. So I'm going to do the same thing for the back piece. Use the facing to turn in the neckline and the armhole. Only difference is that I won't be attaching the straps at this point yet. And the reason for that is so we could open up the gown to make it more comfortable to attach the fringe. I'm going to see that later on in the video. At this point, we can go ahead to attach the upper and the lower halves together. And I like to line up the darts on the upper and the lower half. And I'm going to do the same thing for the back piece also. And I'm also going to join the zip allowance together with a loose seam because I'm going to open that up later on. So now I'm going to place the front and the back pieces front side facing each other, and I'm going to mark the round measurements divided by 2. So the bust divided by 2, the waist divided by 2, hip divided by 2 and all. And I'm going to mark it so I could join the sides together. So this is it after joining. At this point, I'm going to go ahead to open up the zip allowance. And now I'm watching this video, I'm seeing how aggressive I was while opening this zip. I promise the video is sped up, that's why it looks like that. I was really gentle. So at this point, I'll just go ahead to mark out the points that I want the fringe to be. And I'm marking it to be about 3 inches from the armhole, and then from there it's going to be every 5 inches because I'm using a 6-inch fringe. I'm marking it to be every 5 inches so it can overlap with 1 inch. And here you can see why we didn't add the straps, or we didn't attach the straps to the back piece, and why we opened up the zip allowance, because this whole process is going to be easier like that. Can easily attach the fringe. So I'll start attaching the fringe, and I'm starting from the bottom. I'm starting away from the zip allowance because I'll be sewing in that area later on. No need to waste the fringe on that area. So I'll fold the tip of the fringe in, and then I'm going to sew. If you have a zigzag stitch, I think that would be better, but my sewing machine doesn't have, or I currently don't have a sewing machine that could perform a zigzag stitch, so I'm just using a straight stitch to sew. Another thing I'm doing is that once I get to the side seams, I don't sew across the allowance on the side seam, so I'll push the side seam to the area I've sewn and then go ahead to sew the other side, so I don't sew down the side seam. So like I said before, I'm using one single line of fringe, so it's not that full. So if you want yours to be fuller, you can do like 2 lines of fringe each or 3 lines of fringe each. Just know that the total number of yards you'd be getting, you have to double or triple it depending on how many lines you want to be doing, or like if you want to double the fringe or triple the fringe. So I went ahead to continue sewing the fringe onto the lines, and this is what I have now, although I'm not done yet, but I just wanted to show you guys the progress. So I'm adding one last one at the top there, and I'm going to sew this one on a little bit different because I don't want the tape of the fringe to show, since it's like the first one or like the top fringe. I'm going to flip it over and then sew. So by the time I flip it to the other side, like the tape would be hidden. So I don't know how to explain better, but you could just watch the video and see what I'm talking about. So here you can see what I'm talking about. So when I flip it over, like it kind of hides the tape part, so I'll just go ahead to iron it flat so it stays. So this is what we have now. Now I'm just going to flip it over and sew in the zip allowance and attach the zip. Then after that, I could go ahead to join the straps to the back piece. So when attaching the zip, try as much as possible to attach it as close to the fringe as possible, so there isn't like a harsh stop between the fringe and the zip. So here I'm just going ahead to attach the strap to the back piece. One last thing I'm going to do is the bottom hem and the slit, and I'm just going to be gumming it with hemming gum. Alright guys, we've come to the end of this video. I hope you were able to learn something from the video. I hope it was helpful. If it was, please don't forget to hit the like button so it gets recommended to other people. Subscribe to my channel so you could get more videos like this. And if you have any questions, you could do well to drop them in the comment section, and I'm going to be replying to all your questions. Thank you, and I'll see you in my next video.